welcome all of you here on behalf of the Elk Grove Chamber of Commerce Political Action Committee and the Elk Grove Citizen. Cell phones, that's in first. If we can please keep the cell phones, if we keep it on vibrate the most, please, that would be greatly appreciated. But anyways, the Chamber and the Elk Grove Citizen are here tonight to put together this candidates forum for mayor. So I'm going to go through how we're going to do it so we all have a good idea of how this is going to happen. But first off, welcome our candidates. So, the David Herberger random selector has put Darren first, Tracie second, and Steve third. And the way it's going to work is I'm going to allow each one of the candidates are going to have 2 minutes to do an opening statement. Okay? And then we're going to ask questions. Now the questions that I have been generated by the Political Action Committee and the Elk Grove Citizen staff. We also have some questions that are being submitted by the audience over there, right, Jerry? Yeah, okay. Angie's keeping an eye on that. Anyways, the way it's going to work is the first person on the audience's left is going to be able to answer the first question. So, and it's going to be for 3 minutes. Okay? So let's just say the first question is, Mr. Suman, paper or plastic? So Darren will get the opportunity to paper. All right. So for 3 minutes, he's going to wax romantic about paper. And then for 2 minutes, Tracie is going to be able to talk about it as well. And then leave. Does that make sense? And the second question comes around. This one's going to go to Tracie. Tracie, recycling, yes or no? Yay! So she'll have 3 minutes to talk about recycling, for example. And then Mary Lee, and then Darren. Does that make sense? Third question. Mayor Lee will have the opportunity to answer it first, and we'll go back around. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to go, we should be able to get a lot of questions in, and then when we get near the end, we will wrap up with a 1 minute close. So, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, I'm going to be keeping time. So I've got the Mary Lewis Memorial time paddles here. So as they close in on the 3 minute mark, for example, there's 15 seconds. And there's stop. And I'll be keeping time. And then we have Mr. Lance Armstrong, no, not the bicyclist, but the city beat writer for the Elk Grove Citizen will be asking the questions. The questions have been put in my beautiful made-for-radio random question generator. He will pull out a question and he will ask it. So far so good? Everybody ready to get this thing started? Okay. So please, have a seat. Oh, I would ask that if the candidates would not mind taking their cell phones out and putting them on the table. Okay? So, perfect.
I'm following the rules in advance.
Sweet. All right. So with that, let's get this started.
Should I just go?
Go.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Darren Soon. Thank you all for coming here this evening. You know, my dad's family settled in this area in Portland in the early 1920s. He went to Sac High. I grew up in South Sacramento. I went to Kennedy High School. My wife and I were high school sweethearts. We lived in Southern California, Central Coast, and the Bay Area. We've been in Elk Grove now for nearly 18 years. We raised 3 beautiful kids here. I've coached soccer. I've taken them to the wrestling matches, baseball games, basketball, swim meets, cross-country meets. I've seen this area grow, and I see a lot of potential. Now in my 4th year in the council, I'm ready to guide our city. My focus is on community issues like traffic, public safety, job creation. Our worsening traffic is a huge threat to our quality of life, and we need experienced leadership to address it. Unintentionally, I've been training for this role nearly my whole life, starting with being voted the friendliest in my high school class. We just had our high school reunion last weekend, that's why I'm still dwelling on it. To working as a civil engineer and a project manager. I know how to bring people together, build consensus, move things forward. And others agree. I've been endorsed by our Elk Grove Police Officers Association, our Sacramento area firefighters, the rest of my council colleagues, and all 5 planning commissioners. I'm the best trained candidate for this job, having worked professionally in the areas that cities do business in: transportation, land use, flood risk. I'm ready to listen to you and use my skill sets to move the city forward. Thank you, and I hope you have your support tonight.
Thank you. My mic ran away from me. They got over there to get it. Well, good evening. My name is Tracie Stafford, and some of you may remember me from 2016 when I ran for office. I threw my hat into the ring 3 months before Election Day. And some of you are looking like, you did what? Because that was still insane. But I will explain to you. I did that and ended up with, of course, no time, no money, and no team. But what I did have was a mission. And the mission was to bring awareness to the challenges that I believe Elk Grove was facing as citizens. I focused on community first, meaning that we need to focus on the people that live here versus focusing on those who are coming into Elk Grove. And if we would do that, then we would have quite a few amenities that we don't have right now, such as a hospital, such as a performing arts center, such as a downtown. Anybody who's ever worked in economic development knows that you cannot build a proper economic development plan without a town center, a vision, a focus, a brand, something that you're driving toward. So I focused on community first. And I also focused on strategic growth, smart growth. And that's one of the challenges that we also face here in Elk Grove. And as Darren mentioned earlier, our traffic absolutely is horrendous. But it's important to remember that it's horrendous by design. When the city plan was created back in 2003, 2004, an environmental study was done that actually came back and said that the infrastructure could not support the city plan as it was designed then. As it was designed then. You never doesn't like that? Okay, there we go. As it was designed then. But we did a statement of override, which meant we understand that the traffic will be bad. But we're still going to move forward anyway. Traffic is bad by design. So it's important to know that. And here I am, again, 2 years later, with the same platform, the same issues, because nothing has changed. If we want change, we need to do something different. We know the definition of insanity. We don't do that anymore. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Lee. I'm the city mayor, and pleased that all of you taking the time to come out to enjoy us and the unraveling of what it takes to be a candidate, what our plans are for each candidate, respectfully so. My story really extends back about 40 years. 40 years ago, I came to this country as a 4-year-old refugee. The reason why I tell that story is because it's so important to what being American is. My father's job was to rescue American pilots during the Vietnam War, and that's what earned my family amnesty here to the United States. Well, I've been blessed and been privileged to have an opportunity to participate in a free public education. Went to UC Davis, graduated UC Davis, and continued on to law school. With all of these wonderful skills that I learned in education, what really meant, what really became special to me and had some meaning to me was when I decided to run for public office. And many of you know me as a former school board member. I sat on the school board of Grove Unified School District. I came on to the city council as a city councilman. I then was the appointed vice mayor and was elected in 2016. Since jumping into public service, it certainly wasn't unique unto itself. The work that I've done extends many years before as an activist going to the community and trying to find out the needs of the community and then approaching the electeds, then approaching those people in power. What transitioned over was when I got frustrated and realized that as an activist, you can only ask so much and beg so much. To the point where you're saying, hey, enough is enough. I need to be in a position where I can proactively program money into things that have meaning to the city. So since then, I've been in public service. This is my 6th year, and I've enjoyed it. So hopefully I'll earn your vote tonight. Thank you.
first question goes to Aaron Soon. What will be your strategy to lure corporate businesses to Elk Grove?
So I've always said that as government, all we can do is set the table, meaning that I can't necessarily twist a business's arm to come here, but what I can do is provide adequate infrastructure for them to be here, whether it be roads and utilities, power grid, financial incentives if necessary. But I can also have a community that is enticing to them. Safe neighborhoods, definitely, we talked about traffic earlier. So, and things to do for families, a quality of life that if they want to move here, their families want to be here as well. And if you look at a lot of, I used to jokingly, not even jokingly, but anecdotally say, the boss always wants the shortest commute. So you provide an environment where the boss and his or her spouse want to live and their family. That's how you can entice jobs here. As mayor, I can have conversations with these individuals, understanding their roles, having worked in business myself, understanding the needs of business, the infrastructure, their finances, having those conversations, having empathy for them recognizing that. And a mayor, I think, needs to be able to be, in a way, a kind of a salesman and a spokesperson for the city that can lure those businesses here. And the other thing is, I'd say, the last thing I'll say is efficient and predictable processes. When you're a business owner and you want to go get a permit, you need to know that, one, how much it's going to cost, because whether it's that single business owner's knowledge or business where they're financing it themselves, or they have to go back to report to a board of directors, they need to be able to say, this is the cost, and this is what our pro forma looks like. So that's why it's important for a city to have a process that is predictable and efficient. Predictable meaning they're not going to change it in the last minute and you know, if you will, turn the pro forma upside down, and that person has to go report back to their board or their bank. Efficient, because obviously, in a way, time is money, because when they take out loans in order to do tenant improvements or anything else, they're paying interest on those things. So they want to know when they're going to get their approvals and when they can get going, so they can make that money back. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, I am an entrepreneur, and as kind of the governor's small business board, I chaired the City of Sacramento's small business board. I was also the president of the National Association of Women Business Owners, as well as many, many other organizations and chambers. And I can tell you that, number one, all corporations are not created equal. So when we talk about bringing a corporation to Elk Grove, we have to make sure that it's what we want. And that's where the challenge is, I believe, with the focus. I was talking about smart growth. Part of growth is deciding what our community is and what we look like, and in terms of the economy. So in terms of bringing business, I personally believe number one employer here in Elk Grove is government. Number two employer is small business. So not big corporations, but small businesses. So I believe that we should be focused on not only making it easier for small businesses to do business, but also recruiting small businesses. And we have a few programs that have been put into place, but the challenge is they always tend to be a little band-aids versus a deep-rooted strategic plan to not only help small businesses grow, help to create small businesses and recruit small businesses. That isn't just one campaign. It's actually a process. And that's what we need to be focusing on, is developing those processes to recruit, retain, and grow small business that would actually fit beautifully into this community organically.
So I've been a champion of incentive programs, particularly in Elk Grove, like the brewery and winery programs that we have. Not only that, but the most recent one, which is Big Tech. I think that these are things, the little things that we can do. But more importantly, what I have done as the mayor is I've sat down with the North State University and had a conversation about what we can do to bring higher level jobs into Elk Grove. Elk Grove consistently have seen retail over and over and over and over again, right? So enough is enough. I see that, and I see that part of it is the fact that we're a very young city, but we're in a position where we can move that to the next level. Particularly, we look to our comparative advantage in Elk Grove. What do we have? We have a university, a pharmacy school, medical school, psychology school, the upcoming dental school, the upcoming nursing school. All of things are possible because we have folks who have put their money where their mouth is and they want to invest into Elk Grove. This is an opportunity to see our competitive advantage moving forward. The conversation that I've had with the university board is about developing a biotech district in Elk Grove, taking drug and medicine manufacturing and bringing it to Elk Grove and having higher level jobs in Elk Grove. We had a conversation about bringing a hospital in Elk Grove. Elk Grove don't have a hospital. We're a city of 172,000. We can certainly support at least one, definitely, possibly two hospitals in Elk Grove. It's a public safety issue. These are economic drivers that we need to bring in so that it would be a catalyst for the next step. That's how you do it. You give a call, you sit down with people, you have a conversation. But the truth of it is that you can't do it in 2 years. At the end of the term, building a hospital is not going to be 2 years. It's going to take more than 2 years. That's why it's so important to return back to the office to make sure that these deals are shepherded to fruition. Granted, it takes a whole team, it takes city staff, it takes the economic development department, but these are the conversations that we need to have, and the efforts in which we need to put forward is by looking at our competitive advantage.
Thank you. The next question is from Tracie Stafford. What do you think the city's interest in expanding, let me start over. What do you think of the city's interest in expanding its sphere of influence beyond the city's southern border of Cameron Road?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Especially when you're talking to someone that's focused on the community right now. So I have a challenge with it. I am all about growth. I believe that we need to continue to grow. But as I said before, we don't have the infrastructure to support the folks that are here. As we talked about the hospitals, we talked about the roads, we talked about the traffic. And we're looking at bringing in another 26 to 46,000 people into Elk Grove. Yet we've done nothing to remediate the challenges that we have right now. So, fine, again, I'm okay with growth. But let's talk about what we're going to do to remediate the challenges to preserve and improve the quality of life for the people who are here. And that's the piece that we're missing. We're still focused on bringing in rooftops, more people, more people, more people. At what point do we say, let's take care of the people who are here? It hasn't happened yet. And whether you've been in office 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, from the beginning of time, it hasn't changed. And at some point, we will implode. We will absolutely implode, and we've seen it. We've seen homelessness increase. We've seen traffic increase. It's a challenge. So, again, I have nothing against growth, but please let's be smart about it.
And SOI is important for us to push forward so we can start planning. If you look at where the city boundaries end, and you look at the general plan, the plan is to preserve some of these rural areas. In fact, when my wife and I moved to Elk Grove, we wanted to be in a city in which we could teach our kids that milk comes from cows, not from the supermarket. It is so critically important that young people understand and appreciate that. And one of the things that's special about Elk Grove is really our rural area. That makes us unique to this region. And that being the case, if you look at the general plan and the way the council has pushed it forward, that's our plan. It feathers into larger lots towards the east of Elk Grove. That being the case, if we're looking at between 99 and I-5, and we want to plan for something that's out, particularly if we want to look at a radius of 5 miles around this mall area, we got to really look at the SOI. Yes, I'm for smart growth. I'm for thinking this through. I'm for making sure that all the stakeholders are at the table. But more importantly, we can't even move forward if we don't even push the SOI. The SOI is not an automatic annexation. All it is an opportunity for us to start planning. So that's my position on it. I think that we can't just jump the gun and make a judgment on anything that sounds like we're expanding. What we want to do is we want to come to the table, make sure that everyone is there, and we have that meaningful conversation. Elk Grove is in a position where we can't, for the naysayers who keep saying that we got to do infill projects east of Elk Grove, no, I disagree with that. I think that Elk Grove is unique because of the east area, the Sheldon area, the Triangle area. These are the places that have have deep roots in Elk Grove historically. That being the case, I would say we look at that and preserve it, but at the same time, yes, we look at the infill project, but the truth of it is that an SOI means that we, as a city council, would have an opportunity to plan for it. Thank you.
So the sphere of influence is an opportunity for us to have a seat at the table. Right now, if you want to, Councilman Hume and myself during the general plan update, we drove to feather out the boundaries so that when you get down to Eschinger Road, you will be at very much rural type zoning. You go down to ensure that any growth beyond that will be very difficult. But any annexation needs to be compelling. And as was stated earlier, it is a two-step process. Local Agency Formation Commission, which governs spheres of influence expansions and annexations. This is the only one that does it in 2 steps. In other words, the other parts of the state will do both of them at the same time. So this one does it in 2 steps. So any annexation needs to be compelling. And we need to have a seat at the table because if you look at the history of Elk Grove, why Elk Grove Incorporated, is that there are things that were happening within the county and we were not having a seat at the table. A lot of the things, a lot of the growth and complaints that you hear about today, if you think about it, there's only 2 plans that the city has done. Everything else was done in the county. So the Laguna Ridge Specific Plan and the Southeast Policy Area are the 2 specific plans that were done. The Southeast Policy Area hasn't even been built yet. Infrastructure hasn't even broken ground yet. If you want to understand the details about the annexation sphere of influence process, I'll be happy to talk to any of you about it. But the rest assured, each one needs to go through MSR, Municipal Services Review, before you're able to apply for annexation. So there is a process that is intended to ensure that you have the infrastructure in place. SB 610 ensures that there's a water supply study for any units over 500. So that always, as usual, what people heard about environmental impact reports. So we want to have a seat at the table, and any annexation needs to be compelling going forward. Thank you.
The next question is for Mayor Steve Lee. A level playing field for Elk Grove businesses is important. Do you support project labor agreements, also known as community workforce development agreements? Please explain.
So what I have been pushing in City Council is a workforce training agreement, distinguished specifically by providing opportunities for young people, veterans who are coming from the battlefield, and people who are changing careers, or people who don't have jobs and are looking for opportunities to train. Yes, I am in support of a training agreement so that we can work with the trades, and these trades is all inclusive. It's not exclusive anyone to work with the trades so that we can actually have these training programs. As a government entity, what we have is taxpayers. What we have are taxpayer dollars. What I want to see is I want to see these taxpayer dollars be leveraged so that any project that the city has sent out an RFP for, anyone who comes into contract with the city, they would have the interest of the people. That's the number 1, training. Number 2, what I would love to see is I want to see the monies be spent locally. I think that's equally important. The reason why that's important is because there's spillover. There's spillover into other businesses. We have a contractor that's building something for Elk Grove. We tell them, hey, you got to make sure that you're focused on local hires. And what that's going to happen is that person's going to hire people from Elk Grove, from this region, that's going to spend money back into the region. That's going to help other businesses. They're going to buy homes, cars. They're going to spend the money at Costco. These are things that are extremely important. The other thing that I think we need to look at is how we can leverage the public's money. The public's money is so very critically important. I work in juvenile hall as a juvenile hall school counselor in my day job. Daily, I see students and I hear from them. The number one thing that would stop crime is a job. Because every one of those kids, their rationale and reason for being in there is because they committed a crime by getting involved in selling something or doing something, right? It's all tied into economics. That being the case, as the mayor, I see how important that is, and I see how critical it is, and I push it forward. Now the question back to you is, how do you define PLA? That's how I define a community workforce training agreement, which I don't necessarily say it's PLA. I think PLA gives a negative connotation that it's union exclusive. I'm talking about training program, I'm talking about leveraging the public's money, I'm talking about local hire, I'm talking I'm monitoring OSHA so that we can be effective in the use of the public's money. These are things that can come forward. These are things that we can discuss. These are things in which we can monitor and not necessarily label them to cause controversy. I don't think that's necessary. So, thank you.
Well, it is a controversial item because the community workforce training agreement is a project labor agreement with added components that get you helmets to hard hats, that get you, having other incentives, local hires. But at the end of the day, it's a project labor agreement, but it's not meant to be negative. It is what it is, and I think we need to define it and decide as it's a leadership decision. You take a leadership. There's a lot of things that are controversial, but you need to decide which way you're going to be on and go forward. That's what a leader does. And so myself, I will tell you that I needed to learn about this issue, and it's taken me time. And what I found is that for public works projects where we spend government dollars, I want to ensure that that person is getting paid what they should get paid. In other words, ensuring there's no misclassification of wages. If you're a teacher, and I pay you as a teacher during the day when you teach class, but at night when you're grading papers, I pay you as an assistant. Is that right? This is what I'm talking about. In some cases, and I'm not going to say everybody, but in some cases, there's a risk of that a worker is paid as, pick a trade, we're talking about, maybe if you're an iron worker, you work with iron, but when you're carrying the iron to the truck, you're paid as a laborer, and so you're not paid that same wage. So there's things like that that occur. And there's a lot of debate over it and saying, who's right, who's wrong. And this is where, you have to make a choice as a leader. And me, somebody who has worked both in the public sector and the private sector, and I currently work in the public sector, I have the benefit of health benefits, of a pension, and I recognize that that has a lot of value to me now that, raising my family, and as I get older in my career, I don't reveal my age exactly, but those are things that become important over time. And when you look at the construction industry, that it's physically intensive over time. And so if you don't have those safety nets in place, you're going to pay for it. We are going to pay for it when those individuals go to the hospital in the emergency room because they don't have insurance or they don't have as good enough health benefits. So that's why for public works projects, if I'm going to say we as government are going to take care of or spend those monies, it needs to ensure that those employees are being taken care of. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?
I sure can. A level playing field for Elk Grove businesses is important. Do you support project labor agreements, also known as community workforce development agreements? Please explain.
Okay, thank you. This is where I believe we identify the politicians from the advocate, because I will just answer the question, and I am in support of PLA agreements. And I will tell you the reason that I'm in support of them is because it does allow for that negotiation, for people to come to the table and actually look at the private sector, the public sector, how can we work together? We actually identify and make decisions about how they're trained, who actually will be hired in terms of putting a requirement on using Elk Grove labor. So I am absolutely in support. I, as a consultant, have worked in public and private sector, and I will tell you, I've seen the difference, how labor improves the quality of life, the benefits for those who are not labor, or not covered, or not in a union. And I will say that specifically, there was an entire unit at UC Davis that ended up with equity increases because they had to be kept level to what the union employees were paying. So there are pluses, there are minuses, and the job of a leader is to, number one, come out and identify your position. And it's number two, to actually figure out what's best for your constituents, and that means all of them, whether they're union or not. So to look at specifics and be able to say, yes, I would approve this, I would approve that, obviously there's a lot of work that needs to take place to make sure that, again, it's an even playing field for everyone, in every sense of that word. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Vice Mayor Darren Soon. The mayor is the financial and social leader of our community. Have you demonstrated financial competence in your personal and professional business dealings? Please provide an example or explain the difficulties you have experienced.
Yes, I mean, obviously we all have personal finances that I manage all the time. I've got 3 kids, I'm trying to go through college one day. But personal or professionally, I used to run pro formas for do land acquisitions. And as part of working in the private sector, always running feasibility studies for acquisition projects and working on infrastructure finance agreements for community facilities districts. So I do have a abundant amount of professional and personal experience in finances. Thank you.
It wasn't, I'm sorry, one more time the question?
Yes. The mayor is the financial and social leader of our community. Have you demonstrated financial competence in your personal and professional business dealings? Please provide an example or explain the difficulties you have experienced.
Okay, well, I would say yes. I worked my way up from data entry operator to senior management in high tech over many, many years. So I learned from the bottom up, how to deal with finances, starting with a small department, moving to a position where I was managing multi-million-dollar projects and offices. So absolutely, but I will say that we have staff, and I heavily depend upon the experts in that arena to direct, and that is a sign of a good leader, that you hire people who are strong in every area that is needed. And we have that with our city. I will say as an entrepreneur, that was very different because I didn't have that department, that resource, those CPAs to lean upon. So I had to buckle down and figure it out. And yes, I made some mistakes, absolutely, as a business owner. And I'll never forget the first taxes that we did, and we actually were audited because they asked, why would you spend this amount of money on a project or whatever it was? And it was because I come out of high tech with multi-million-dollar contracts and didn't realize as a small business owner, it's not about the contracts that you sign, it's about the cash flow. So I had quite a bit of money coming in, but it didn't come in at the time that those taxes were done. So I had to think differently about my finances and how that worked as a small business owner. So I would say absolutely, I'm a competent fiscal manager, and being an entrepreneur took me to the next level, understanding that from a perspective of a small business owner, as well as someone who is managing large budgets with a complete staff that's handling that.
So I point to my record. I sat on the school board. We managed a $600 million annual budget. I sat on as a city councilman, worked about a 293 annual budget. Currently, I'm the mayor. Every time I sat on the board, and those aren't exclusive, we managed to balance the budget, and we managed to have a surplus. On the school board, we had a $65 million surplus. That's what carried the school district through the recession. On the city council, we currently have a $24 million surplus. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question goes to Tracie Stafford. Oh, this is an audience-provided question. Please explain your views on improving non-vehicular mobility, active transportation in our city, especially in our built-out areas.
One more time.
Please explain your views on improving non-vehicular mobility, active transportation in our city, especially in our built-out areas.
Okay, that goes back to sort of the smart growth piece and the challenges that we have with our traffic right now. And actually, I was over in Seasons, I think it was yesterday, speaking with some of our senior citizens about their challenges living in Elk Grove. And they talked explicitly, there was language used in this discussion, about the lack of transportation. One woman said it took her 6 buses and all day to get back and forth between her doctor's appointments because of the lack of public transportation here in Elk Grove. And we know this to be true. I mean, we know that we have our own public bus, and we don't use Caltrans, we don't have light rail. So it is complicated and it is challenging, and I believe that we most definitely need to address that, because at this point, as I mentioned before, you know, the way the system has been designed, just by policy, the infrastructure cannot support the traffic, but yet we haven't stopped our growth, so we're going to continue. So now it's time that we really need to focus on working with regional transit, bringing light rail in, just doing what's needed for our citizens back again, you know, community first.
So the way I understand this question is you're talking about non-vehicular. You're not talking about public transportation, you're not talking about cars. One of the priorities that I champion in Elk Grove is walkability within our cities. We have wonderful trails, we have parks, but one of the things that are missing, and that comes with a young city, is to be able to connect all of these parks and all of these trails together. That's something that's part of the general plan of the trails. That's something that we're working hard to achieve. All of that costs money. In order for us to get there, we have to make sure that the money's in place. I think that is extremely important for a city like Elk Grove that's beautiful, that has wonderful parks, that have wonderful trails. We got to connect all the dots so that somebody can actually get on to actually walk somewhere or get a bike and go somewhere. Not necessarily just get in a car, not necessarily getting to Amtrak. But if we're talking about transportation as a whole, then one of the things that Elk Grove needs to be approaching is not necessarily operating in a vacuum. We can't just have E-tram here and hope that it would be able to connect well with RT. I dream that someday we will have light rail in Elk Grove. I dream that someday I will be able to jump on light rail and get to the airport. I hope that someday we will have a metropolitan transportation a firm that handles everything, something like RT. That then puts us in a good position to apply for federal grants and we will fund additional public transportation here in Elk Grove. But in a nutshell, there's multiple levels, so that's where I stand. Thank you.
So I serve on the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, which is the regional transportation planning body for this region, 22 cities, 6 counties. I also serve on the Sacramento Transportation Authority. I've been a huge advocate for multimodal transportation system, including next-gen transit, which is a regional transit system. But speaking about active transportation, getting people out of their cars, that relates to the multimodal I was telling you about. We're going to have 600,000 people come into this region in the next 20 years. We can't just build our way out of it, even with cars. In Elk Grove Boulevard, Costco opened today. You know how busy Elk Grove Boulevard is. We can't, I want to see a shuttle down there, but I also got to get people out of their cars. I've been a huge advocate for a bike share program. I've been advocating for connecting our trails as well. There's a lot of incentive for us to get out of our cars if we create the opportunity. In other words, we create safer bike lanes. As part of STA, I advocated for the advanced funding of funding from the state to build a HOV lane on I-5 7 years ahead of schedule, but along with that project comes a separated bike lane along Franklin Boulevard between Laguna Boulevard and Bighorn. And then the rest will be connected by Sacramento. I advocated to our council for separated bike pedestrian bridges over on Laguna and Elk Grove Boulevards. One, because of the safety, when Baxless was killed, I met with Jim Brown and basketball advocates, Sacramento basketball advocates, about striping in bike lanes, getting those green stripings at the intersections. And had advocated for that, got the approval of the council, and then further advocated to put funding in the CIP. Those are multi-million-dollar facilities, both of them, but they need to be done in order to encourage active transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mayor Lee. The office of mayor is a nonpartisan office. That seems to have benefited the community in coming together to meet challenges. What are your thoughts on partisanship entering Elk Grove politics?
I think what's really important here is to identify what our core values are. When I entered politics, I never defined myself where I stood on the political spectrum. What I stood is I love Elk Grove. I want to contribute to Elk Grove. I love the schools. I love the fact that there are close to 100 parks in the city of Elk Grove. There are opportunities in Elk Grove in which I can capitalize to benefit my family so that my kids can grow up in this beautiful city. I never define myself as saying, hey, I'm this side of the political spectrum. I think my frustration is when politicians put politics before people. And I've seen that over and over again. For example, this whole Costco deal, Costco that we just opened today, should have happened 5 years ago. Why didn't it happen 5 years ago? It's the same deal that we struck this time. These are things that are so critically important. I think that when you involve politics, you involve politicians, they have a tendency to want to be political. They want to have a tendency to want to put politics first. Partisan politics, this is a nonpartisan office. It shouldn't be partisan. But quite frustrating is that things that have meaning to the people are being blocked because they're partisan. Don't let the rhetoric fool you. Every action that I make, every action that I do is in support of the people. It makes a logical conclusion that we have to support training programs for young people. College is not for everyone. We know that for a fact. How do we achieve that? How we achieve that is develop training programs, leverage our public resources so that we can actually help some of these young people get training programs. How do we help veterans that are coming from the battlefield? These are things that are critically important. These are things that are nonpartisan. How can anyone say that they're opposed to developing a training program for young people? How can anyone be opposed to developing a program to train veterans that are coming home from the battlefield? How can anyone be opposed to programs that will be able to benefit somebody who lost a job or is in transition into a different field? These are no-brainers. These are not partisan issues. These are issues that benefit the community. These are issues that will help somebody rise up out of poverty. Thank you.
So I agree wholeheartedly. This is a non-partisan seat. Therefore, nothing from my campaign will talk about the Democratic choice or the Republican choice. I don't know that other candidates can say the same. I have the endorsement of, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat, my colleagues on the council, people in the community know that I've always been solution-oriented as an individual, as this candidate. We talked about it, I mentioned in my opening statement. Everything is about the community for me, whether it's traffic, public safety, job creation. These things are about how we live together in our neighborhoods. These things are how we feel safe, whether we feel safe in our neighborhoods, whether we're able to bring jobs here, whether we're able to relieve traffic. Partisan politics is so divisive today, has no place in this city. No place. Thank you.
Well, I believe that all political offices are nonpartisan. Because ultimately, regardless of what your political affiliation is, you're governing for everyone. I've seen that more as a political stand than it really has to do with governance. And that's just my opinion. And again, you're talking to the outsider here. So take that with a grain of salt. What I have seen in politics, just my years of participating in this effort, has been that it's really not even what we're talking about now. It's not about values, it's not about your political position. It's about how you position yourself to win the race. That's when it comes into politics. And that's what you're seeing basically on both sides. I don't fit into any box. I have political affiliation. I have organizations that I work with. But ultimately, that has been the challenge for most folks, is that they can't quite figure me out. And you shouldn't be able to quite figure someone out if they're focused on the greater good, if they're focused on the people, if they're focused doing the right thing for everyone all the time. You're never going to fit into one box or the other. And that's just the reality. So in my opinion, all political offices should be nonpartisan.
Next question goes to Vice Mayor Soon. Repair of Elk Grove roads are vital to commerce, quality of life, and protection of our environment. Do you support or oppose Proposition 6, the gas tax repeal? If Proposition 6 passes, how would you how would close, I guess the wording, how would you close the funding gap to repair Oak Grove roads?
So I definitely oppose Prop 6. And people talk, I mean, I'm so passionate about this because right now, you've heard it before, maybe you've heard it before. We've got approximately $8 million shortfall in road maintenance just in our city alone. Prop 6, if it passes, it would take away about $4.5 million that we would get out of that through formulaic population, right? So how many people and residents we have in the city will get so many dollars from that through this STA, Sacramento Transportation Authority, which myself and Councilman Hume sit on. I-5 expansion I talked about earlier, HOV lane, the bicycle lane on Franklin Boulevard, all funded through SB1 gas tax. The overarching problem is fuel efficiency is getting better. Gas tax revenues haven't been adjusted since 1990 inflation. The revenues aren't coming in. It's a user fee. Gas tax is a user fee. So if it goes away, there's a lot of funding for road maintenance, for projects, the capital projects that I just talked about, such as those, that are at risk. We might be able to still do the I-5 one, but there are many others that would benefit our community that are at risk. So I'm adamantly opposed to it. If you hit that pothole and your car breaks, get a flat tire, in fact, that happened to me, not me, my wife, driving home one day, got 4 new tires, hit a pothole, and it cost me $300. Your alignment goes out of whack, you're paying for it, whether you're gonna pay for it there or you pay for it at the pump. So you're gonna pay for it when you have a degradation of infrastructure. How I would address it, we would continue to go after grant funding that we do as a city in order to fund the road maintenance. We have a assessment district that if you're a new development, you have to annex into. That was put in place several years ago because we recognized that the monies we were getting wasn't enough from property taxes. There wasn't enough to support the maintenance of the road infrastructure that we have today. So that's how I do what I would do to address it. Thank you.
Well, I also oppose Proposition 6, and for the same reason, primarily because of where we are, we need the money. You know, we're at $8 million deficit a year as it relates to repairing our roads. That's the problem, but the bigger problem is how did we get there? So we talk about having a $24 million reserve. We're talking about, the Costco coming in and the funds the incentives that were given for that Costco to come in. Why do we have an $8 million a year deficit when it comes to fixing our roads? And actually my campaign reached out because we're wondering if we really would see $4 million coming back from this. And the anticipation is that it's really going to be closer to $2 million. So potentially, we're still looking at a shortfall of $6 million that we're going to have to find somewhere. And that's a challenge. That is absolutely a challenge. But again, it's about going back to smart growth. How are we spending our money? Where are we spending our money? Why are we looking for grants to fix roads? It should be something that should be built in to the infrastructure as a priority. Thank you.
So the shortfall is real. One of the things is, with this proposition, we would be able to supplement that and move to address it. The fact of the matter here is that we still have a shortfall. There's been talks about the county approaching and doing additional taxes. The first thing I want to say is I'm opposed to additional taxes. We pay so many taxes in California. That's part of the reason why I'm always so skeptical whenever fellow council members propose taxation on the people. It doesn't make any sense. If we're not making ends meet, we tighten ourselves. We cut in other places. That's number one. However, if this proposition was is successful in repealing the gas tax, what's going to happen is that we're going to be in a deeper situation in Oak Grove. Yes, indirectly, some way, somehow we do pay for it. But the fact of the matter is that we have a shortfall. And in order for us to address that, at least we have this proposition that supports, that we'll be able to, we have the gas tax that will be able to fund the shortfalls. In order for us to move forward, yes, we can look at different options, but I think more importantly, we need to be looking at internally and seeing how we can tighten the belt and shorten this up. I think this reserve is really important. This reserve is very real. In the event that we need it to go into a place to get us through something, that's something we can use. But I wouldn't go to it as a general rule. It's always a last resort. This is a rainy day savings fund that we have acquired throughout the years of careful planning. And that's something that we can tap into in the event that we do need it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, the next question goes to Tracie Stafford. A thriving local economy is fundamental to a city's success. How specifically have you contributed to Elk Grove's economy, and what initiatives would you propose to help Elk Grove businesses thrive?
Oh, how I personally contributed to Elk Grove's economy? By spending a fortune at Walmart? Let's see. As I mentioned before, I am an entrepreneur. I actually started my business here in Elk Grove in 2002. And to be honest, I found it to be challenging to do business in Elk Grove. And it was mentioned a little bit earlier about the permitting and how important that is for a small business to know what you're going to pay, when you're going to pay it, how much it's going to be. And to this day, I know that we don't have that service system. One person can go in to get some permitting and it's one price, someone else goes in for the exact same thing and it's something else. So I found it very difficult to do business here. But what I will say is that as a small business advocate, I worked with the Chamber of Commerce, Sacramento Chamber of Commerce. I actually was a member of this branch as well, the Elk Grove Chamber of Commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce. We always were supporting businesses that were in Elk Grove. And because I was in Elk Grove, I was specifically focused on bringing in entrepreneurs and supporting them and helping them to build their businesses. As the president of NABO, we also recruited women business owners, and we focused primarily on building their businesses. So we worked with quite a few beauty salons and other businesses here in Elk Grove. So that would be, as a part of my philanthropy, working with small businesses where I impacted the economy here. But I will go back to what I had said earlier. And a big part of building the economy would be to focus on, as I mentioned, we are one of very few cities that are the size that we are. Again, we're the 30th largest city in California, and that's out of 483 cities. Yet we do not have a town center. And as I mentioned, I was the deputy director for the California Downtown Association, where we focused on this very specific challenge. And it's very difficult to actually create a proper economic development plan without a brand, without a downtown, without a vision that you're moving towards. So how do we sell Elk Grove? And I'm sure we all have this challenge. So think about it, we're trying to build an economy here. And we've talked about pharmaceuticals, we've talked about small businesses, we've talked about being a soccer mecca, and I think is high-tech mecca. We're focused on all of these different arenas. But the reality is it's very difficult for us to sell Elk Grove because no one knows who we are. So think about that. If someone says, what is Elk Grove? What do you think about? Who is Elk Grove? We hear everything from rural and desolate to it's a bedroom community. And we've done this research even here in Elk Grove. So what I believe is that we need to focus on building a brand, having a strategy, actually putting together an economic development plan that makes it very clear who Elk Grove is and what our focus is in terms of building the economy. Then we can go out and recruit the businesses that we want to bring in. We can actually bring, sorry, I'm out of time, but we really need a strategic plan for economic development.
Elk Grove's brand is real simple. I moved here because I love a safe community that supports higher education, that supports K-12 education. That's the idea of Elk Grove. Elk Grove is beautiful. Elk Grove is filled with parks, it's filled with schools that are not falling apart. Elk Grove is filled with full, loving people. Every door that I knock on, I talk to people that love Elk Grove. That's why we're here. That's our brand. I'm proud of that. I'm not going to let anyone talk me onto that. Elk Grove is special. That's why I picked them. Now, what's important here is we're talking about, what is contributed to the local economy, to local businesses. I've been an advocate of incentive programs like the brewery and the winery. I've been a champion of the tech incentive program. I've been a champion of the Rice Program, which invests $15 million into local community banks. These are efforts in which we can push forward in making sure that our money here in Elk Grove goes a long way. It makes logical sense for me. I'm an advocate of making sure that we give preference to local businessmen who are bidding, or businesswomen who are bidding on contracts in the city. That's the initiative, that's the next step. But what I've done is I went back to my record, $50 million to the community, and a set of programs for the winery and brewery, a set of programs for high-tech. Thank you.
So, I've been an advocate of those programs too, as a member of the council, but we passed it together. I've also been an advocate of permit simplicity. I talked about setting the table, making things a process that's easier. Working with Councilman Detrick and Councilman Hume, we advocate for that. We're the first city in the state of California to adopt permit simplicity. So if you go and get tenant improvements for your place, you can get a permit in as little as a day. There is something though that I did before I even got on council, and that is when I was on this Community Planning Advisory Council, I fought as a chair of that council at that time. I advocated for, and with my colleagues, we battled against a rezone of employment zone land to residential. And we didn't have a full victory, but we got half. And that half was the developer at that time, this is in the early 2000s, agreed to build that the next day, office condominiums. So when you go down between Laguna Boulevard and I-5 and Elk Grove Boulevard and I-5, the office condominiums that you see back there, chiropractors, dentistry, medical facilities, all those businesses was a direct result of the work that I did on that Community Planning Advisory Council. I would say that's my biggest contribution in a singular manner, because now when I see those jobs there, I knew at that time when I fought for against the rezone, I knew that having that employment center nearby was so important. And so I'm really proud of that moment. I also talked about again, permit simplicity. We talked about the tech grants as well as the Brewfest. Gobble Wobble is also something I fought against because it wasn't benefiting anybody in Elk Grove. There was a lot of things going on there. The entity was not benefiting Elk Grove. I fought to make sure it came to Elk Grove, and it's run by Chicks in Crisis today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question goes to Mayor Lee. It's a question from the audience. Recognizing that the mayor and council have adopted a strategy and goal of raising our local sales tax, I am wondering, with the grand opening of Costco and the estimated $27 million added sales tax revenue, do you still stand by your strategy of raising local tax?
So as I stated before, I do not support that, and it's not in the plan that it's going to be a sales tax. In fact, my rhetoric in that particular deliberation was, my fear is that we're putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be attractive for people that are coming outside of Elk Grove to purchase something here. We are putting us in a position where we're developing a progressive tax that is going to harm individuals regardless of their income. I think that's alarming. I think it's also alarming that the people that build our beautiful houses in Elk Grove can't afford to live in the city of Elk Grove. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So in terms of the Costco deal, the reason why I think the Costco deal is good is because we had 100% of a patch of dirt. 100% of a patch of dirt. We were screaming all the way to the bank, right? I'd rather take 50% of the tax bill. There's an end date to that. If we pay it, we're done with it. That's the reason why I support the Costco tax, the Costco tax dollar share. But where we are right now is I have no intention of pushing that forward. I would vote against it. My colleagues on the council had proposed that, but where we're at right now is it's indefinite, where I would plan on seeing it again until something dramatic happens, right? If the city of Elk Grove, we have a crisis, we have a public safety crisis. Now that makes logical sense, because the one basic thing that we should be providing for our constituents is public safety. When we have the extra money, we can dream a little. We can think about things that we can't do. But if we don't have the money, then don't go after that. And so that's where I'm saying. Thank you.
That's right. If we don't have the money, how are we supposed to make our city safer and hire more officers? There's a conversation that needs to be had. And you can't just say we don't like taxes because it's politically correct. Again, solution-oriented. We need to figure out how we as a city, as a community, can survive and be better off. When you have legislation like Prop 47 that are making it easier for misdemeanors and things to go unpunished, encouraging more criminal activity to happen, when you have people feeling less safe, that's when the community starts to fall apart. And if you can't pay for those services, we're going to be in trouble. We are limited at this time by our public safety facility. And I'm working in emergency response. Those facilities are not cheap. It's not the same as a regular building. There's redundant systems you have to put in place, generators, all those kinds of things. It's earthquake proof and all of that. It's very expensive. We don't have that money right now. We also need more money to hire more officers. In terms of tightening our belt, we have much of our city is consultant driven. We have some staff at the higher levels, but a lot of our cities are consultant driven. We've watched our belt, our waistline pretty well. So it's not about just cutting. It's about figuring out how we invest in our future. And I'm not talking about necessarily a sales tax right now, but I do think we need to look down the road and make sure that we're doing everything we can to set ourselves up, make sure we're taken care of in the future. Again, we talked about the gas tax. If that goes away, the infrastructure improvements that would not occur. And so we need to be sure that in homelessness, we need to make sure we have enough funds to deal with that as well. So there's a lot of needs, not wants. I'm talking about needs to keep our community safe that we need to think about and problem solve. And everything should be on the table to do that. Thank you.
It seems like that was a question for Ocean, but I will answer. I didn't take a position on this, obviously, because I am not the city council. But what I will say is that, yes, I feel like a broken record right now, that I don't believe that we need to increase sales taxes. I believe that we do need to tighten our belts, but not as much about tightening our belts as to pay attention to where the money is being spent. I do believe that there are some areas where we have, put out some funds that potentially could be better used elsewhere. And I do believe that the incentives given to Costco would be one of those areas. So without actually identifying the areas that I don't want to say waste, but areas that potentially could be redirected to other focuses. I think we need to look through and identify what those expenses were. But I know for a fact there are quite a few that I believe I would redirect to the police force if that's where it's necessary, or to the roads. So it's a policy decision that is made based on the focus of our city council.
Thank you. So the next question goes to Vice Mayor Soon. 4 years ago, the city purchased a 100-acre lot along the city limits at Grant Line Road. There is a proposal to build a sports complex there. Should the city continue pursuing the sports complex plan, or should the land be used for another purpose?
So I've always said, let's get the land in the city first so we can control it. It's going through the annexation process that we talked about before. I am a believer in the recreational amenities for us to provide to our residents. We got over 6,000 kids who play soccer here, but we need to make sure that it is something we can afford to do. So we just need to see where, if there's any available funds, how much volunteer work we can do to help with those costs. Councilman Dedrick and I took a tour of a similar facility out in Davis. A lot of it was donated by residents of those areas. Grading, surveying, the equipment to do those things. So as a community, we can come together to provide an amenity that will serve many of our kids in this city. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all costs that come from us. I think from a community perspective, we can work together to do that. So I think it's still worthwhile to invest in that, but it takes time, Maybe it doesn't happen right away. There's a lot of things that we can't spend money on. There's a lot of restricted funds that we have. So people talk about the aquatic center. That was paid for by Mayoral fees from Laguna Ridge District. You can't use it outside of there. Okay, so it's not as simple as to say, well, we should just spend it on something else. No, those are restricted funds. So you have to look at what bucket of money you're talking about before we can allocate towards certain things. Obviously, if you did the sports complex, that would probably be something more from the general fund, and then we'd have to have a conversation about that and decide what would the priority be. But I would be advocating to look at other revenue sources and volunteering and donations from the community in order to get that built. Thank you.
So we were just discussing funds that could be allocated to some other needs. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Purchasing those acres wasn't necessarily something that we needed to do. So now we have this land that we have spent money on that could be used elsewhere. So that's a prime example of what I'm saying, in terms of raising sales taxes, we need to be looking at where we're spending our money now and could it be better used elsewhere. But since we have that land now, and it appears as though we really don't have the funding, to be quite frank, to do much of anything with it. But if we can find a way to get grants and get developers to actually invest in the community as well as just bringing in the homes, then I would like to see it be a multi-use area. Of course, bringing in areas that mean something for the children, because our teens have nothing to do. They literally hang out at Dutch Bros. And I've raised 4 of these kids, so it's not like, yeah, my kid has a caffeine habit now. And because there's really no place for them to go, there's no place for them to be, there's no place for them to hang out. And when you talk about the teen centers, which are great, most children, if you have any teens, they don't want to hang out at the teen center. They do not. They want their own place where they can be left alone with no programming. And that is something I would like to see something developed there. I'd like to see a performing arts center there. I would like to see banks. I'd like to see multi-use buildings where there are storefronts on the bottom and there are apartments, affordable apartments on the top. Because we have that issue there as well, where we don't have, our kids can't afford to live here. People that grew up here can't afford to live here. I mean, there's a 31-year-old woman at one of my Rotary clubs telling me that her daughter's finally moving out because she couldn't afford to live here. So there's quite a bit that we can do with that. It also goes back to our town center. Of course, it wouldn't be in the town, at the center of the town, but again, it could be that multi-use area that brings the community together. And I believe we would go out for Performing Arts Center and for the teen center, the other things that we just talked about. Thank you.
So 40 years ago, when this property was purchased, the idea is to develop a stadium, and there was hopes of bringing MLS into El Pro. Well, that wasn't the case, being that there was another mayor in a different city which had a lot more pull and is a ball hogger. And so he took that, and so that's what we see in this property. Nonetheless, I think that this property is really prime real estate. The reason being is if you look at the Southeast Connection and what is going to be developing in the next 10 years, we can offload this property and actually make some money. That's my hope. But in terms of what we have now, we have that in our place. What I'm hoping to see is I'm hoping to see a partnership with some sort of private entity that would be able to deliver these soccer fields. And it's not just soccer fields, it's a multi-use field. The reason why this is so important is because when I was on the school board, I saw over and over again, our school district would go to Cal Expo to rent the property so that we can have FFA competitions, we can have wage competitions. I think that most of these students really are from the Galt and the Elk Grove area. That being the case, this is a place in which we can actually use from that. In addition to that, in the city of Elk Grove, there are plenty of young soccer players. Every time there's a tournament here, they have every field, every hotel room booked. And so that being the case, how do we accommodate as a response, as part of the responsibility of a city council, of the mayor, is to be able to provide for the community. I think this is one of those that's extremely important. We said multi-sport complex. We say multi-sport fields. It's not just limited to soccer, but we have to explore the possibilities. We said that we're still looking into it. I'm hoping that we'll be able to find a funding source for it so we can move forward. But nonetheless, it is in our possession. It is in our powers and in our control. So I'd say stay the course, we explore, and see what else are out there in terms of options. Thank you.
Okay, next question is, can you work diligently and prudently with your fellow council members? Give an example of situations where you have succeeded in working with people that have different opinions on important issues. Yes, I should let Tracy know that question is directed toward you. Would you like me to ask the question? Can you work diligently and prudently with your fellow council members? Give an example of situations where you have succeeded in working with people that have different opinions on important issues.
I would say absolutely. I can work with city council members, I can work with pretty much anyone. I will say that one of the reasons that I have had the level of success that I've had in business, again, working my way up from data entry operator to senior management high tech, then I started my own business where I ended up becoming a small business advocate, being a governor appointee, sitting on several boards, running the City of Sacramento Small Business Board. And it's because I have the ability to go in and see all sides. Because the focus is always about, for me, at least the greater good, who needs what are we coming together to achieve. And in order to figure out what you're coming together, you know what you're trying to achieve, but you need to figure out what every person in that room is trying to achieve, which may or may not be the same thing. So coming to consensus is quite often a challenge. And I will say, gosh, a specific example. Oh my goodness. I would say working with, I won't say what the organization was, but it was an organization that was a nonprofit organization. And they had 7 or 8 different groups within this organization that had different ideas of where they wanted to see happen. And when I say 7 different groups, I'm talking about ethnicities that were coming together to create a nonprofit event. And they did not agree on just about anything, and sometimes they weren't agreeing just for the sake of not agreeing. And this was my project that I had to run. So just what I said to you, I had to identify what's in it for him, what's in it for them, what's in it for them, what's in it for them, and then make everyone sort of work together by giving them a piece of what it was that they needed to create this amazing outcome that we ended up with. But when you realize it's not just about the outcome, it's about getting to the outcome. And that means you've got to bring everybody along with you. And often you have to really, it's beyond collaboration. It's almost psychology at some point.
Yes, I can, and I'll give you an example. If you look at the voting records of the City Council of Elk Grove, probably about 97% of us are unanimous on all the issues. And you know why? Because if it benefits the community, and each of us can articulate why it benefits the community, then it makes logical sense. Politics, by definition, is conflict. We are supposed to argue passionately about our positions in council, and I do that. I get in it with the guys, but the moment we walk away from council, we have to be professional, and we can go out and have dinner together. I think it would be concerning to a voter, to a constituent, to see that council members get along all the time. Who's doing the thinking? There's a saying that I've heard before. When everyone completely agrees with everything, there's only a few individuals, perhaps maybe one, who's doing the thinking. When I'm passionate about something, for example, by district elections, I will argue passionately in council. And I get in it with the council members. That's part of politics. We have to vet things out. We have to make our argument. It's okay. If you didn't want to choose politics, if you didn't want to debate passionately, then this is a wrong field. I think it's very healthy in a democracy, like here in the United States. I think it's very productive when we debate and then we move beyond that with a consensus. Either in your favor or not, nonetheless, you walk out and you still greet each other, still treat each other with respect. So the simple answer is yes, it's all part of politics. Thank you.
You know, at the basic human level, it's about developing trust. And you do that like we would anybody else. You get together, maybe it's a drink, maybe it's coffee. It takes time though, it doesn't happen overnight. But you have to put the work in to do it, right? All of you know this, you've all done it. But I can tell you, I've only had drinks or coffee or lunch with 3 other members on this council, and they're all sitting in the audience today. And they all support me for mayor. Have we debated on things? Absolutely. We've debated on extending light rail in the town. We've debated on sales tax measures. We've debated on roundabouts versus signals and stop signs. But we do, 4 of us, go away, respecting one another, not worried about if there's going to be a subservient action taken against us at the next council meeting, where somebody comes up to the podium and asking leading questions. So absolutely I can do that. As long as I'm a willing partner, willing to do that, I'm trusting too. But I think all of you in a similar fashion, if you're not showing that same level of trust, then you're not going to exhibit it back. So you hold back a little bit. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question goes to Mayor Lee. What qualities do you seek in Elk Grove's future city manager?
What I'm looking for is somebody who's inclusive, who's willing to work for 5 different classes, who's willing to go out into the public and engage with the community without any fear, who's willing to make a stand, to advocate in the best interests of the city. That's what is so important. Somebody who's prudent with the finances, somebody who gets along with upper management, somebody who connects well with everyone. So in a nutshell, I want a perfect person. But the reality of it is that may not be the case. We're going to take the best person, the most qualified person that comes to us. Honestly, Laura Gill was doing an excellent job. I didn't support her leaving. I wanted somebody like Laura to continue. Yeah, Laura's not perfect. Nobody is. But in a perfect world, I want somebody who will be able to work with everyone. But at the end of the day, we're going to take the most qualified person that applies. But in a nutshell, I want somebody who will be able to connect with the diverse communities within Elk Grove. Elk Grove speaks 60 different languages. Elk Grove is the 7th most diverse city in the United States. Somebody who accepts that position is going to have to be willing to engage in different communities. Somebody who steps in that community or in that position has got to be willing to step out of their comfort zone. That somebody is hard to find. That somebody, hopefully, we will find. But nonetheless, it really is the quest for the perfect person. Thank you.
I think Ms. Gill, in her nearly 10 years tenure with the city, did do a good job. She did. It's what we needed at the time. 10 years ago, we were a different city. 10 years ago, we had there were financial issues with the recession. We had a much smaller population. Personally, I'm looking for a city manager who's going to be not only inclusive, but engaging in the community. Somebody that all of you will see out there in the community as well. Get to know that person just as much as you know us. I'm looking for somebody who's going to inspire an innovative culture in the city. I've been a big believer in continuous improvement. I want to see us as all of our staff. I want to see all of them out there, not just looking at what our regulations and things say, but how do we problem solve? Let's look at what we can do to get creative. And I think as local government, I think servicing the community, we owe it to the residents of Elk Grove to think in that way. And I'm looking for the city manager to be our partner in developing the next generation city, that 21st century city. Thank you.
Well, I agree with everything that was said. I mean, obviously we want a C-level professional, someone that really understands how to run the city from the bottom up, preferably. And when I say bottom up, I mean not someone that has always been in management, but someone that has worked their way up through the trenches so they really understand what is needed at various levels in the business of the city. But I'd like to add to what was said. I also believe that it's not enough just to hire someone who is inclusive, because I think that's just too broad. And we really need someone that understands equity and inclusion, someone that actually has either worked in an office or a city that actually had an office on equity and inclusion, because it's very different from just saying we accept everybody. And as an example, we had recently had a diversity audit, and we had, as a part of the ad hoc diversity committee, and we had a pretty late night meeting with our city staff about that and how we were going to implement some of these suggestions that were made. And what the city staff said was that they would be putting together a group of diverse employees with the city and let them pick and choose what it was that they would implement. Not understanding that this is a science. It's a science. It's like taking an algebra class before you've taken addition. There's a science to equity and inclusion, and there's a roll-up, and there's a basis. So having someone that really understands that and not just trying to get a bunch of people in a room and saying, go for it, is really important. So again, I agree with everything that was said here. I think they painted a beautiful picture of what is needed. But with the 7th most diverse city in America, with 16 languages spoken, and with the racial tension that we have experienced over the last year, we cannot ignore that this is a challenge, and we need to make sure we have someone in office or someone who is running the city who understands it.
Okay, thank you. That completes the questions. Now we're going to do the final statements, and we're going to give each candidate two minutes, starting with Vice Mayor Soon.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you everybody for sitting here and listening to us talk all night. I just want to repeat that I believe I'm the best qualified candidate. A lot of things you heard tonight, some of the answers were similar, but I believe I'm the only one who actually can go into a level of detail that no others can. And it takes knowing the details of these things, how things work, infrastructure, finance, the budgets, in order for me to work strategically on behalf of you. That's what I believe a mayor is supposed to do. Not only be the figurehead, not only be the statesperson, but that person needs to be able to operate strategically on behalf of you. And you can't do that if you don't understand how these things work, how they're put together, because it's not just at the local level. You have to work at the state and federal level. You have to have your trust from your regional leaders, which I have the support of many regional leaders outside the city, in addition to my council colleagues and the planning commission and the public safety members of our community. I thank you for the opportunity to listen tonight. I'm happy to talk more with you about any of these things. But we are at a pinnacle, and I think we can be a great city, an even better city, under the right leadership. And I look forward to doing that for you, for the city of Elk Grove. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. I agree, it's been a long evening. And it's interesting because throwing around who's most qualified requires that you identify what that means for you and what you believe the city needs right now. And in terms, and how many of you are business owners? Are there any business owners in the room? Now, as business owners, as executives, as managers, we know that we hire people, as I said earlier. We hire experts in different fields, whether it be civil engineers or accountants or whatever it is. We have experts because as leaders, our focus is policy, not procedure. And when you mix policy and procedure, you're going to have problems. Now, this is a policy body. And what we need in this policy body is we need leaders. And when I say leaders, it's leaders beyond the city limits. Folks who have understood and worked with different cities, different states. I have traveled the world in advocacy work. And I believe that we need someone who is people-powered, people-funded, and who's focused on the people, or we do get caught up in politics. And some of the decisions that are made that we don't understand, it's because it really has nothing to do with what we're aware of. And when you have someone on that city council who's focused on the community, who's funded by the community, then you know that at least there's one person who is focused 100% on your outcome, and who's brave enough to stand up and fight for you. And that is what is needed right now in Elk Grove. Right now, if we continue as we have been, we'll continue down the same trajectory. Everything that we're talking about, as I mentioned when I started, and I said kind of, I'm back. I'm back because here, 2 years later, we're still facing the same challenges, or only things are a little bit worse. It's a beautiful city. I love Elk Grove, and I want to stay here. I want my children to be able to live here, and we have to preserve it. We have to preserve our quality of life, and that requires someone in office who's willing to be brave enough to stand up for us.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming and spending your evening with all of us tonight. I appreciate your time. I appreciate each and every one of you being willing to investigate and learn a bit more. But there is one point in which I'd like to clarify specifically. Councilmember Swin have probably forgotten the time in which we had coffee in Laguna West, Starbucks. I paid. You probably forgot about the boba tea off of Whitelaw. He paid. You probably forgot about the lunch in which we had on Folsom Boulevard. He paid. You probably forgot about the beer that we had in Milltown, Elk Grove. He paid. All of this is less than $50. That's why it's on recorded in Form 700, just for the record. But for every council member who has been out there, I've had lunch or coffee with them. I think that it's disingenuous to imply that I do not make the effort to meet with them. I do. I do make an effort. I want all of us to work as a team. We do. But at the same time, we argue passionately. On another note, as the mayor, I'm not going to be a micromanager. I hire people. I jointly hire people that are very good at what they do. We have 3 employees. The city council has 3 employees: city clerk, city manager, city attorney. They are the ones who hire other people to do their job. We don't like what they're doing, we get rid of them, right? But I'm not going to go and tell them, I disagree with the grade of asphalt that you're putting on that particular road. That's not my job. My job is to make sure the money's there. My job is to set the policy. I'm not a micromanager. I think that's what city council needs to be. That's what the mayor needs to be. The mayor will continue to be the face of Elk Grove. He will go to those quote-unquote photo ops because so many communities are asking him to be at 10 different events at the same time. That's the rest of the story. That's part of it. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. I think it's important for us to recognize that in order for us to move forward, we have to put politics aside. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I can earn your vote. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much wraps it up. I would like to say on behalf of the PAC and the Elk Grove Citizen, I want to thank the CSD for making this venue available. Let's give one more round of applause to our passionate candidates for the city of Elk Grove. It is quite a testament to our community that we have such talent making an effort to lead our community. And finally, and most important, I want to thank all of you for being here. Elk Grove is the best kept secret in Sacramento County, and the reason it is because all of y'all are involved in our community. And I appreciate that, and thank you very much. Have a good evening.